Hello, so I am going to be showing you how I do glass etching today. These are the materials that I use. I've got a wine glass, some tweezers, a pair of scissors, gloves, and the contact paper, as well as a popsicle stick. I use contact brand contact paper for my stencil. It's a lot cheaper than vinyl. And the Armor Etch glass etching cream. With these, I will be using the contact paper with the cutout images and text that I wanted to use on my glass today. And what I'm going to do is start by just putting the image down, and it does take a little bit to make sure it gets straight. As you can see, I lightly press down afterwards just to make sure it sticks on the glass, and if a piece needs to get pulled back up to make sure it's straight, that's not a problem. I actually do that quite a bit. Right now for this image, it was originally supposed to be like a gift tag, I believe, from the Cricut subscription, and I'm using it as the stencil, and that's why it doesn't have a full complete border. So I'm putting a bunch of little pieces together. That's why the tweezers come in handy so much. I find them to be almost like my best friend in glass etching. So pretty much I put on each corner of the stencil, and I try to line it up as best as possible to make sure it's a straight line so it looks in proper proportion, so it doesn't look like skewed or anything. And I just literally lay it on the glass. I haven't done anything. This is a brand new glass right out of a box. And I add in the little details in between to give it the full characteristic of the ship. Using the tweezers is a great way to get the precision you want without getting your fingerprints all over the stencil, even though that doesn't really matter. But I can also see a lot better because the tweezers, you can see, are a lot smaller than my fingers. And by doing that, I just make sure that there are any air bubbles that are in the paper get kind of pushed out. And that's what you can see. I'm rubbing the contact paper just to make sure it's super smooth, super flat. If there are any air bubbles near the edges, the etching cream will seep under and create a skewed image. So I just am going to finish up putting the minor details left on this ship to finish that up real quick. And at the end, I'm going to be putting a few pieces of contact paper directly over the border to close up those little gaps that are around the sides. So that when I put the etching cream, it's not going to flow over or anything like that. So here I am going to be closing up the gaps on the clipper ship, and as you can kind of see, I just put a piece of tape that I just cut out from the contact paper and just line it up as best as I can from each corner of the bottom and the sides, and as well as the top, and just smooth it out really well. I make sure that it's completely pushed down before I move on to the next one. Now this side of the wine glass, I'm going to be putting some text. This one's going to be a little bit trickier. I found that putting text on a wine glass is very tedious work, especially when it's all on one piece like I'm doing right now. If you feel like it would be easier if you cut up each line and put it on, that's up to you. You just need to be careful of seeping lines in between. But what I do is I pretty much start from the center of the contact paper and work my way outwards. So I'll straighten out and make sure that the middle of the contact paper is fairly aligned properly, and then I will work my way onto the outside. Now, any bubbles you get near the top won't be a problem because the etching cream is not going to be put on there. I use scissors though for the wine glasses because I find it gets it a little bit easier to smooth it on. Because of the curvature of the glass, text will not fall perfectly straight unless there's some like plastic overlapping, if you will. So I just start wiggling and kind of pulling each section just to make sure it gets a little straighter and with no bubbles or creases. And you can sort of see it happening in the E as the video goes on. And it just takes a little bit of wiggling around and fixing it, pulling it out a little bit more just to make sure that gets straight. What I end up doing is kind of pulling it, getting the E as straight as possible and pushing all those air bubbles away, and then just letting there be a crease up in the corner of the contact paper. That will not be a problem because I'm not going to be putting the etching cream on there. Now, with the slice in the paper, you're going to have to be a little careful making sure you don't go too crazy with the etching cream. And as you can see, I'm just pulling up and replacing as I go just to make sure that everything works as it should. Now, for the most part, I am done with this side. I'm just finishing up trying to get some of these air bubbles out so it doesn't hit the edges. And I just take my nail and kind of scrape those along so it doesn't touch the edges of the letters. Now moving on to the next side, this again is going to be a little bit of work. It's working basically with the two layers and making sure each of the letters doesn't have any air bubbles or creases. Otherwise, that'll cause problems when you put the etching cream on. So I just work pretty much one letter at a time, trying to push across the air and get the contact paper as flat as possible. Again, if there are creases in the contact paper where the letters aren't, like in the corners and such, it's not going to be a big deal because you're not going to have any of the armor etch going in that area. But as you can see with this F, it is being slightly troublesome. So I end up cutting very carefully. Make sure you don't cut through to the cutout image, and just start pulling it so it fits to the curve. And yeah, it really looks like a pain, but the end result is gorgeous, so don't worry. And I've had to do these for a couple glasses so far, and it's time consuming, but once you get it flat, it's not very much of a problem, like at all. So as you can see, the F is pretty much done. I got a little air bubble, but we'll come back to that. And it's just getting the rest of the image smooth on there, which I cut another line through, so hopefully that the plastic will just kind of fit to the glass a lot easier this way. And so it's just smoothing out near the actual cutout of the letters is what's important. And you can see that it takes a little bit of trying and pulling and pretty much trial and error. But when you can get those air bubbles out, it'll be well worth it in the end. Okay, now that I've gotten it pretty much smooth, I'm just going back and double checking everywhere with the air bubbles, and I just take my nail and kind of just squeeze as much of the air bubble out as possible. And one thing I found is with the creases, if you kind of push it together so it's not just a bubble, it'll just kind of become a straight line, and it'll help from air bubbles forming again. That's what I've done, and it seems to work pretty well. And then just getting the rest of the air bubbles, especially the ones in the middle of the phrases, I need to make sure those get out and are as smooth as possible. If there's any air bubbles in between the letters and the contact paper, it will seep under and it'll pretty much ruin the glass. I found out by trial and error that as soon as the Armor Etch touches the glass, it activates. So there is not really a way of getting that off if it spills over on accident. Just try new glass. And so now I'm pretty much going over and making sure there's no air bubbles. And we can see there's just a couple lines, but the air bubble is not actually touching the edge of the letter. But I'm just smoothing out those creases just in case, just to make sure that everything's clear. But everything is pretty straight now. What I'm going to start doing now is adding in the middles of the letters. So I'm going to take my tweezers and start filling in like the triangle for the A's and the in-betweens for the F's and the I's and all the in-betweens of the letters. And it's just kind of a tedious process. It's just making sure that everything is aligned the way that you want it, as it should be, and just making sure the placement is how you want. If it gets unaligned properly, or if you don't like it the way it is like that, you can just kind of scrape up the little piece that you just put on and replace it if you want. And it ends up just like this. You can just peel up the little place, and having tweezers is definitely helpful because then you can just easily just lift it up without worrying about the piece getting unsticky or anything if your fingers touch it and so on. And sometimes it'll just kind of slide into place if you push it right, and then you can start working on all the other letters. So now I'm pretty much done with putting in the middles of all my letters and just finishing up the E right now. And after that, I pretty much just want to go over each side of the glass and make sure that there are no air bubbles and that all of the middles of the letters are sitting properly on the glass. I usually just tap my finger and push down real quick just to make sure that it sits properly and it won't come up when I'm putting the etching cream on. So yeah, you can see all the little lines, and just squeeze out all the little air bubbles if any have formed during the time that I'm putting in the center of the letters. Now we're going to move on to putting the etching cream on the glass. It's important to wear gloves because, well, as a cautionary detail on the bottle, it says that it could burn if contact with the skin. So, just as a precaution, should wear gloves. And I use a popsicle stick. Some people use like a foam brush and just kind of dab it on. The popsicle stick, I find it's kind of easier to dispose of and everything because you use it once, put it in the glove, and you can just throw it away right after. But I lightly go over it and just kind of dab on the etching cream just in each little area, and if there's excess on a certain part, I'll kind of pull that up and use it in another area to get the most out of it. And I do that for both sides of this glass, and I just lightly put some on. You don't need to put too much etching cream on. I found out that it doesn't make too much of a difference how much you kind of glob on over your stencil. You might as well save the etching cream and just put a little bit on, enough to coat it nicely, and just work your way around and cover as much of the image as possible, making sure you get each of the little areas. Now, one thing to be careful of is because I did cut the paper to make it fit better to the curvature of the glass, you want to make sure that you're not going to get any of the etching cream on those creases just in case. So just be careful of where you put it and don't kind of be sloppy about it. You want to be kind of neat and make it just go around where the letters are. That'd probably be your best bet. After you smooth out all of the etching cream and get it the way you want it to look, I leave it on for about 30 minutes. It gets a nice hard etch into the glass, and afterwards I just rinse it off in the sink with some warm, cool water, kind of room temperature, and make sure I peel off all of the contact paper, and then it's ready to go. But before you drink out of it or use the glass, it would be a good idea to actually wash it first, just to make sure there are no more chemicals on it. And this is the final result. You can see both sides, and gets a nice clean etch. I will be making some more videos on some Cricut creations and get them uploaded as soon as I can. I hope you liked the video, and like, favorite, subscribe. See you later.